Hi there, and hello, and welcome to my talk, which is called The Turtle and the Hare, and it's about how we caught up with the VS Code API implementation in Theia. I have a twofold motivation for this talk, and the first one is to let you know how great the support for VS Code extension is now in Theia, and the second one is because I think the project can serve as a good example on how to undertake a major project in a community-based OSS project. A little bit about me. I run my own software consultancy called Castleridge Software, and I have a long history in development tools, starting with the original Eclipse team with Eric Gamma and those guys. And most recently, I worked at Red Hat on Eclipse J and Java IDE. And as Jonas said, I'm one of the project leads of the Theia project. So for those who have been living under a rock, the VS Code extension API, what is it? VS Code, as you know, can be extended with JavaScript modules. We call those VS Code extensions, and they run in a separate process, and they are loaded at runtime. And you can use them to add language servers, support for languages. You can add themes, you can add views and editors, etc. And what's special is that you can add, but you can't remove or change the behavior, which you could do with the compile time extensions that Theia also has. And how it works is that the require call in the Node.js is overwritten. So instead of getting a module when you do import VS Code, you get a handle to an API object, and that API object is hooked up to the UI of VS Code or Theia. That's how you can add stuff. You get the extensions usually from a marketplace. There are two that I know of. The first one is the official, so to speak, VS Code marketplace, but you can only use that one with the VS Code product. And the second one is the OpenVSX marketplace run by the Eclipse Foundation. And there are lots and lots of extensions. Microsoft talks about thousands of extensions, but I've seen sources that say there are over 40,000 extensions in the VS Code marketplace, a bit less in OpenVSX. So let's talk a bit about history. How did this all come about? In 2013, a project was started, or a product called CodeEnvy at the time. It later went to the Eclipse Foundation and became Eclipse J. What it was an IDE running in the cloud. So you would have a developer workspace in a container somewhere, and it would show you a proprietary IDE based on Google Web Toolkit. And all was good. And in 2015, VS Code came out. It was based on the online Monaco editor, but it was running on the desktop, and it had the ability to run extensions to extend with new support for languages, etc. Wasn't very successful at that time, which soon changed. And in 2017, the good guys at Typefox decided that they do like VS Code, but wouldn't it be great if it was more extensible and if it would run in the browser? So they started the Theia project to do exactly that. And later that year, the J project, under the guidance of Red Hat at the time, decided to use Theia as their IDE in J. And to that intent, they contributed a plugin system and implemented a good part of the VS Code API to run certain extensions in J. Oops, that was too fast. Yes. So where were we 2 years ago with this? We had a cool infrastructure for not only building VS Code API, but contributing your own namespaces if you so wanted. But we had one problem, and that was that we didn't really know what part of the VS Code API was actually implemented. And the whole thing would work like this. If you wanted to run an extension in Theia, you would have to test it extensively. Then you would file bug reports, and then you would fix those bug reports if nobody else beat you to the punch. And testing extensions comprehensively is quite hard. So there was some tooling built. Let me show you that. And that tooling would actually, you could run it against a particular VS Code extension. This one is about VS Code Java, for example, and it would print you out what symbols from the VS Code API would be used, which types and functions, and it would also spit out which API was missing, right? And with that, we would open an issue, and then we would work on those various symbols to have them implemented. That was okay, but it was still put a lot of work on the adopters of Theia. So our idea was, wait, let me switch back to the presentation. So the idea that if we wanted adopters to have any confidence that they could just take Theia and run extensions in them, we would have to move to a system where we support a fixed version of the VS Code API. And that would move from test order extensions to look into the extension package JSON and see if the version number that it requires is the one that Theia supports. But it would also be a commitment for the Theia community, because we would commit to that if we didn't implement something, let's say in 155.2, and we said we did, that would be a bug. So were we ready to make that commitment? There's only one problem with that, and that API gap we had at the time, it was simply huge. So what to do? First of all, we had to find out what we need to do, and for that we needed some new tooling. So somebody actually implemented a tool that could take some version of Theia. Here we see 3 versions of Theia at the top and some versions of VS Code. And we would go into the source code, read the API definitions, and then spit out a comparison. And if something was the same in Theia as in VS Code, it would say it's fully supported. That's the green one. On the right side here, you can see which versions of VS Code actually brought this API in. And we can also filter on this thing. And here, for example, we can see that the version 183.1, which we don't support yet, brought in a class, I think, that's called auto-closing pair, and it shows up as unsupported here. So then the next thing we needed to do is make it easy for people to contribute this project, because it's a large project, right? So we opened up what we call these days gap issues. And this one is actually the first one that I opened, I think, 2 years ago. And you can see that there's a pretty big list of things that we still need to do, right? So next thing we wanted to do is actually get people on board. And there are 2 parts to that, to doing that. And one of it was to talk publicly about the project and get people on board. We, for example, advertised the project that we wanted to do this on the community call, and we would send mail to the developer list. But also we would talk to main contributors to get them to commit budget and support for the project. And the last thing we had to do as the initiators, we had to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. So to build the trust that everybody would shoulder a fair share of the burden here, we would have to lead and do a significant amount of the work ourselves first. Jonas Helming, who we've heard before, actually calls this the train model. So what do you do if you want to go somewhere with the train? First, you have to put the train on the right track. We did that by identifying the to-dos, what do we need to do, and by making it simple for people to sign up for the different items to do, right? Second thing is you need to tell the people about the train, because if nobody knows the train is leaving, you're going to be quite alone on the train. The third thing is you reserve some seats, because you need a certain critical mass of contributors or stakeholders that support the project to get it off the ground. And the last one is one of the most important ones. You need to drive the train out of the station. So you need to put in some work up front to get other people to commit to the project. So this slide, if I can find my mouse. Here it is. Thank you. This slide you've seen before, and it actually the one on the left starts when we finished the first gap issue, 155.2, and we opened that one on August 9th, 2021, and closed it on November 3rd, 2022. That was about 15 months because there was a lot to do. The second issue was 164.2. I think that's about here. And we opened it on August 3rd and closed it on December 20th last year. So that was 4.5 months. And the last completed gap issue was actually the one bringing us up from 181 to 182. And we opened that one September 26th and closed it less than a month afterwards. And currently VS Code, I think, is the October release. That's 1.84. So we're 1 or 2 versions behind all the time, right? So where are we right now with this? No, first of all, what do we do if we can't keep up? Because that was one of the concerns that came up early on. What if the guys at VS Code just put out so much API that we can never keep up with them? And there are a couple of mitigation strategies that we used. The first one is that we don't promise to have the exact same behavior as VS Code. There might be some things which make a lot of sense for VS Code, but don't necessarily make a lot of sense for the adopters of Theia in their use cases. So we can get away maybe with some simpler API that's just as good or almost. The second thing is stubbing. You've seen the little gray icons in the VS Code comparator where it says stubbed. And that means that we would that the API would be implemented, but it would not be functional necessarily. It just wouldn't do anything. Your extension would still run, but it wouldn't be able to do its work. The latest 2 features, which we've actually recently implemented, are the Notebooks API, which you've seen a demo, and the testing API. And those are actually the last two major areas where we had stopped API. So right now we're actually functioning pretty complete. And we use a principle of graceful degradation. So even if some things might not exactly work because they're stopped or whatever in Theia, we still want the extensions to come up, and we want the parts of the extensions that are not directly impacted by the stubbing to work as expected. So what's the current state? Actually, we're about 1 to 2 months behind every release because we can never really catch up because we can't start work on catching up before VS Code actually does the release. And we have an ongoing process in place that identifies the gaps for each new version of VS Code and how to get the implementation going. And we even implement the so-called proposed API. Proposed API in VS Code is stuff that's not guaranteed to be stable, and it's usually only used in internal extensions or the so-called built-ins in VS Code, because VS Code and Theia ship with a set of extensions out of the box. So we implement whatever we need to make those run. So if you ask me, probably this is a bigger success than anybody thought like a year ago. And the question is, what were the factors that allowed us to have that success? And there are a couple ones. The first one I'd like to talk about is technology. And I think the TypeScript comes with an AST parser, helped us a lot because it allowed us to build those tools that allowed us to build the comparator and automate a lot of the discovery of what we have to do. And the second is GitHub, because, for example, we can easily publish the results of that automation we have of those tools in GitHub pages, but also GitHub issues. Everybody likes to bitch about GitHub issues, but for what we're trying to do, I think it actually works quite well. The next one, I think, is the community. And there are a couple of aspects. The first one is the culture. And I'd like I think one of the important points here is that it's a cooperative culture versus a competitive one. And that's remarkable because a couple of our contributor companies, they are actually competitors in the marketplace. So to have them cooperate in a trustful way is, I think, a win. The second is it's low ego, goal oriented, and ready to compromise. And I think that's in part because of the personal traits of the people involved in the community. But it's also, I think, leadership fostering the culture whenever we can in our interactions with the community. And the third one, it's we have kind of a high responsibility and low ceremony culture, which means like because we rely on people to do the right thing, we don't fix stuff in advance. We fix what's broken. So we don't have processes for things which just work without anybody actually making up rules beforehand. Second point is the stable core of experienced committers. That has two advantages. First, they are pretty fast at doing stuff because they have been around for a long time. But it also helps with getting new people on board because usually there is someone available who can guide them and, for example, review the PRs in a good fashion, which is is not as simple if you have a lot of turnaround in the committer base. And the last one I'd like to mention is the education of the stakeholders. They are very aware of how open source works. They are aware of the value that they get from the framework. Instead of just seeing the cost of paying people to work on it. And they also are aware of how a commons work, that if everyone looks out for themselves, the commons starts to crumble. So you give a bit and you get a bit. Oops, sorry. So bonus results. So these are the things that we got out of the project beyond the immediate goal of actually supporting VS Code API. And I think the first and foremost is trust, and in multiple dimensions. Well, the first is trust in our ability to deliver. Through that project, I think the community gained the confidence that we can take on large projects and we can solve the problems as a community. But also, trust has been established among the contributors. That means that, for example, if I do something and I say I'll fix it later, I will fix it later. I won't just leave it aside. And so people have the trust to do something in advance and trust other people to catch up and contribute also to a common goal. And lastly, I think the adopter community has gained more trust in us as a community, that we for example, that we can in the future deliver great software in Theia. And there's also less work for the adopters right now. So it used to be that they had to do a lot of testing to just make sure that everything works with the extensions that they wanted to use. And now it's much simpler. They can just assume that most extensions will work out of the box. And as already mentioned, the better support for the extension API has also improved Theia a lot if you want to use it as your everyday IDE. I actually am using IDE, or have been for I think 3 or 4 months now, and I really can do anything I want in Theia these days. Right, and with that said, I think now it's time to build your own train. Do we have questions? So there is one question, and it's, what is it? If there are other projects that we're kind of running with the same model. And I'm glad you asked. Let me pull this up here. There we go. There's, as you've been made aware of, we try to make Theia better as a general IDE. So we're kind of running the same script on improvements. This is called dog fooding for Theia, which where we collect issues that hinder us from using Theia as the API, the IDE for developing Theia itself, and it kind of has the same look as with the gap issues that we have, what we want to do, and you can sign up when we took it to the community, etc. So we're kind of running this as the same thing. And there's another. Okay, here's one. So what's the template when creating or re-implementing a VS Code API? The template. Usually, a lot of the time, we can actually copy code from the VS Code code base. That is not a problem because it's MIT licensed. So if we follow all the rules of the Eclipse Foundation, we can use that as a base. Okay, as a base of the implementation. And the follow-up question was, can you shortly describe the process based on a very simple VS Code API example? I can't give you a concrete one, but usually there's a part, like the API works like this, that there's a part on the UI side, which we call the main side, and there's a part on the extension host side, right? So you have to add a function to that on the VS Code side, in the extension host side, that that implements the API, and then you have a remote procedure call interface to the main Theia process, right? Which you have to design, or you can copy it from the VS Code code base. It doesn't really matter. And then on the UI side, usually we have a service that's not specific to VS Code API. So for example, we have a test service. That's a good example, actually, because I know a lot about it. We have a test service, right? And you can contribute to that test service just as a Theia extension, right? You can do it with Inversify. And one of those test services, actually, you can contribute to also from the VS Code API, right? So you usually have the VS Code API side where you implement your X side of the service. You have the main side of the service that hooks into the general Theia UI service. Does that answer the question? Oh yeah, if I want to contribute to this, where do I start? And the best way to start is actually those API gap issues. And you can search for them. For example, if you go to issues and look for API gap, you will find the newest one. That's 183, right? And it always includes a link to the previous one, which is done, right? So that's how you can find where you're going. And then if you want to do something, you can just go here and you say assign to myself. And it's probably a good idea if you're a new contributor, if you show up to the community call and announce yourself so people know who you are. Do we have time for one more question? I think we do, right? So the last, or maybe, yeah, let's see how it goes. The question is, how would the train model apply to other projects or other organizations? And I think it probably you don't need it in many organizations. For example, if you're a company and you have complete control, you could just tell people, you do this, and you have a meeting where you sit in a room every week, and you can coordinate that way. You don't need a train model. The problem it solves is if you have people with different intentions or different interests in a project, and if you can't tell people, if you need to have commitment or consensus on how to do this. And I think it actually, there's a couple of things, if I may go back to the presentation right here. Where is it? Yeah. And kind of back. Yeah, the process, I think I skipped over this, but this is actually a good slide. The process, and the gap issues are really good because they're first of all, they're incremental. You can do stuff whenever you have time and budget, right? So that makes it easy to contribute. and they're usually very granular. So the increment that you can do is very little. So if you want to get started, you do something very small. If you have a bigger budget, you can do a bigger part. But usually there's a small, easy to get started way to get in. And it's decoupled. As I said, anyone can join in and just sign up for an issue. There's really no coordination effort usually. Yeah, so I hope that was answered that. I think there are no more questions. All right. So thanks a lot, and see you at the next session.